Good morning. Today we're going to talk about running diagnostics on drivers and motors, making sure that we are getting proper impulses and making sure that while we're running our system, we're not running into any issues. If you're receiving this video, that means that one of your motors has been tested out to show that there are some issues, and it's not on the motor side, but it's on the driver side. That is to say, something inside of the control box is sending faulty signals to your motor and it's not running properly. If you are finding that it's just the motor causing the issue, then this is not the video for you because it's the motor and not the driver. This is after we've determined that the motor is the actual issue. First thing that we're going to do before we get anything started, we're going to take off the lid to the control box, and we're also going to remove these 4 motors. Don't worry about the motors that are connected to these. That's not important for what we're doing here. So these can remain. These 4 need to come off. Once you have that, you can go ahead and continue on with this video. Lid is off. 4 cables are off, and what we're going to do is we're going to take one motor. In this case, I'm taking an A motor. You can take your Z motor, whatever motor happens to be the problem, and we can address it from there. So there are 4 ways that a control box can have issues with its motor. One is the inputs and outputs on the breakout board could be failing out. 2, the wire coming from the motor, from the breakout board to the motor driver, can be causing an issue, and then the output wires off the motor, off the driver, going to the outputs here on the control box can also be faulty and cause the issue. And lastly, the gray drivers here could also be causing you some issues. So those are the 4 ways that the system can fault out, and this is how we test for them individually. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how these control boxes are put together and where everything is, so that when we go to run these tests, and I'm just going to put this on here for the moment. All right, so in terms of driver order, it's X, Y, A, and Z. That's X, Y, A, and Z. And X, Y, A, Z. Yep. And let's go into where all of these wires go. And you'll be able to determine which one is which by following the lead cable. This goes to the A port. Oh, there we go. And it goes to the A driver. A port, A driver, Z port is then following its own. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the X port there. Z port is going to the Z driver. And if we're going to look at the drivers, you have control side. Control side have leads that come to the breakout board, and they have there's the Z drivers, Y drivers, X drivers, and A drivers. And you'll see the number listed next to them. So the left-hand side of your breakout board, of your driver, is your control side, and your right side is your output side. And we're going to test these individually. So, for this example, we're going to test out using the Z motor, Z driver system. What we can do is we're going to first test the output. We want to make sure that the output is not causing us issues. We do this by removing the output and taking the A output in this case and swapping it in its place. And again, double check by following the lead to that point to ensure that you do have connection. Then you're going to take your, in this case would be your Z motor, and plug it into your A port, because now all of your Z input signals coming off of the breakout board, coming out to the Z driver, is now being output to the A port. And when we run this test, we can determine if the output turns out to be correct, then there is a fault in this wiring. If it's a wiring fault, all you have to do is first unscrew these 4 pins and confirm that it's maintaining proper contact here. And then, of course, confirming that there's proper contact on the cabling, in this case for the Z-axis. Make sure that you have proper contact being made here at the DB9. So if this fixes that issue, that's fantastic. If this does not, then we'll go ahead and replace. Oops, I got that stuck there. And we're just going to replace the original pins. All right, next step We want to test the input side, and we test the input side by, again, swapping each of these ports. This is the Z-axis inputs. I'm going to swap them for the A-axis inputs. And this is inserted here. I'm not inserting them all the way, but in your case, you will insert them all the way. And because we're back to the output coming back to the Z, because we swapped these back, I'm going to put the motor back into the Z-axis port. And because we've plugged into the A, we've taken the A outputs, A output from the breakout board, so the A inputs to the driver, and put them in the Z. When we hit up and down, so when we hit up and down on the keyboard in Mach 3, we should be able to see motor motion coming off of here. If the issue still persists, then what we will do is test one other way, because this comes down to if the input, if the issue still persists, then we may have something at the breakout board, or it's in the driver itself. If it stops, then it is these input cables, in which case you will unscrew these terminals, confirm that the wiring is making complete contact, both here and on its corresponding opposite end at the breakout board, to ensure that there's proper contact and continuity throughout the entire cable. The last thing we can do and test is, if we're still experiencing issues after running these two tests, what we do is we take the Z outputs and the Z inputs and plug it into the driver, into the A driver. This specifically tests the driver, because we're completely removing the previous one out of the equation, and we're still outputting to the Z axis. So we're going to keep this plugged in here, and then we're going to hit our page up and page down to test whether or not we're getting proper control. If we're getting proper control, then this driver is faulty, in which case we'll replace it, and that's how that goes. So there are the 3 tests that we run when it comes to initially finding out what's wrong with a motor, and it's what's wrong with the control side of a motor system. If you have questions, or if at each step of each phase of the test, please make notes and let us know what you've done. So let's say, and we're going to use all the same terminology, I swapped the control side of the Z-axis driver with the A-axis driver control side, and attempted to run, and found that in running it, it began to work again, in which case that means that that Z-axis control wire is experiencing the issue. And then you'll run that test, disassemble this, and figure out whether or not you were making complete contact. But that's the way we want to talk about it. Control side of the driver has been swapped, or the output side of the driver has been swapped. Or I swapped drivers, in which case you took all of the control components from one side and put it to the other. That's how we're going to talk about this, and I just want to make sure when you do reach out to tech support, we're talking in those terms so that everyone's on the same page.